Hey there, everybody. It's Cory. We are about to go live on Facebook here in just a couple minutes. So I see there. Hey there, everybody. It's Cory. We are about to go live on Facebook here in just a couple minutes. So I see there. I see what's going on. Okay, just getting everything set up. This is my first time using Crowdcast. Sure. Figured this was a good opportunity to test it. Kate and Claire, I see you're live, or at least have the Crowdcast turned on. So hello there. Awesome. Well, we're just hanging out and making sure everything works. Hello, Kate and Claire. Yeah, thanks for the hellos. As soon as Jeff shows up, we will go live here. But I anticipate him being right on time. Hey, Susan, it's Cory. We are going live in just a moment. We are just waiting for Jeff to show up. Oh, there we go. Hey, Jeff, I see you're there. I just invited you on screen. You'll need to click the little accept button.
Oh,
there he is. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, how are you, Cory?
Right. Good.
Good. Can you see and hear me okay?
Can see and hear you just fine.
Is this mic working?
Yep.
Cool.
All right, cool. So we'll hit the go live button and I'll introduce you and all that good stuff, and we'll get to it.
Cool. Are you hearing any feedback on your end? I don't have my headphones in, but I have a mic that doesn't really pick up much, so it should be cool.
Nope. Sounds good on my end.
I just can't do anything around here. I got to keep everything intact.
All right. All right. I have a joke for you later. All right.
Okay.
And we're almost live.
Mm.
And we're live. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Cory, founder of The Abundant Artist. I am here with the one, the only Jeff Goins from Nashville, Tennessee. Jeff, say hi to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Cory. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So today we are talking to Jeff about his book, this book, Real Artists Don't Starve. I'm so glad you wrote this book. I'm a little mad. I'm a little mad that I didn't write this book, but
I was mad about that too. I was like, well, here we go.
What the hell is Cory doing? He needs to, I'll do his job for him. That's awesome. So while we're waiting for everybody to kind of show up, because everybody likes to show up late to these things, before we get deep into the book, I want to talk about the beginning of your book, because there's such a fascinating story that I had not heard before. And I love that you uncovered this. And it's the story of Michelangelo. And everybody, I think a lot of people have the idea that, the whole premise of the book is that artists don't that a lot of people think that artists don't make money, but actually a lot of artists do. And Michelangelo was maybe a little better off than most people might have thought.
Right.
So why don't you tell us that story?
Sure. So my friend Joe Bunting sent me a story years ago about this discovery that was made in 2003, so fairly recently, by an art historian in Florence, Italy, a guy named Rab Hatfield, who I got to talk to. And what he found, is an interesting way he discovered it. He was trying to date the different sections that the Sistine Chapel were painted in, because Michelangelo painted that over the course of about 3 years, I think. And Michelangelo wrote a lot of letters. And so first, Professor Hatfield was thinking, well, I'll just try to date when this section of the ceiling was painted with this letter that he wrote. But that didn't really work out. And then he thought, well, we know that he received commissions from the Pope for this, so maybe I can go to the bank records and see when he received what commission for what piece of the ceiling. Again, he's just an art historian, just trying to find out when Michelangelo painted this section of the ceiling, because it hadn't been dated yet.
Right.
And there were gaps in the timeline. And so he goes, he had a friend at the city archives. He goes to the city archive, and the way he told it, he goes, I just went to the letter M, and there it was. And he found all of Michelangelo's banking records. And what he found surprised him. There was one bank account that had a balance in the 1500s, early 1500s, hundreds of thousands of dollars in there. And another one, a similar amount. And on it went. And all of a sudden, he forgot about the Sistine Chapel, and he starts chasing this project, going, how much money did Michelangelo have? Because we were kind of told that he starved. Maybe people think Van Gogh starved, which is a whole other story, by the way. So what he found was basically a fortune worth over $47 million in today's currency. And it's hard to, because it's different, the buying power is different, but he was inarguably the richest artist of the Renaissance. And at that point, the richest artist who had ever come along. And what happens after Michelangelo, according to another Michelangelo biographer, and I really geeked out on Michelangelo writing this book, is he set a new precedent for what was possible for artists in the Renaissance who came after him. And Cory, you've done a good job of really dispelling this myth of the starving artist. It really, and you even talk about this in your book, the story of Henri Murger and all these things that happened afterwards. That story, before that in the Renaissance, that's not the story of what it means to be an artist. And so Michelangelo wasn't just an outlier. He was the richest artist of the Renaissance, but he made it possible. He broke the glass ceiling, and he made it possible for generations of artists after him to make a good living off of their art. And it's a fascinating story.
It's such a fascinating story, because the culture and the mythos and the zeitgeist of professional artists, whether it's painters or musicians or writers or whatever, is that you got to starve for your art, right? You got to suffer in order to make great stuff. And meanwhile, we've got Michelangelo, and then we've got Jeff Koons, whose work, he sold not to disparage his work in any way, but he sold a giant metal balloon dog for $16 million. right? And Damien Hirst sells
Right.
a shark stuffed in a tank of formaldehyde for $12 million, right? Like,
Yeah.
whatever you think of the quality of the work or what it's saying or whatever, like, there is clearly something going on with artists making money. And I like that in your book, you don't necessarily just highlight these very wealthy artists,
Right.
but you also talk about sort of the working class and upper middle class artists who are not famous, but still do quite well.
Yeah, the obverse of starving artist is not rich artist. Now, Michelangelo was very wealthy, and there, as you mentioned, are plenty of artists who have made or are making a great living. Picasso, you talk about that in your book as well. Yeah, he was rich. I love the quote by Picasso: "I would like to live as a pauper, but with plenty of money." And he totally did that.
Well, like Monet did that too, right? Like Monet, lived in Giverny, and which he had this house that was out in the country, and he kind of built the land up by himself, and nobody knew that he actually did pretty well, right? He just kind of this country guy who made art and just happened to make a great living at it. So I want to give a few shout outs. We got a bunch of people saying hi. So Luna, Jacqueline, Rupam, I don't know how to say that name. Diana, Susan, Kate, Claire. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate all of the questions that all of you have. So a bunch of you submitted questions to a Facebook post that we put up earlier this week. We're going to get to those. If you do have questions, feel free to post some questions where you're watching right now, whether you're watching us on Facebook or watching us on Crowdcast. Love to answer your questions. We're going to get to those for sure. Jeff, before we dive into those questions, I had a couple things I wanted to touch on with you regarding your book. One of the things that stuck out to me is you got these 10 rules for 12 rules for how artists thrive, right? And I would love to have you, we maybe don't go through all of them, but just give us like how you accumulated those rules, like where they came from, and give us a couple of examples.
You're not supposed to say "great question" because that's what people say sometimes when they're trying to like think of the answer. That's a good question. I haven't heard that question yet. So I was mentioning earlier, the obverse of starving artist isn't rich artist; it's thriving artist. And in that respect, that's kind of like the definition of success is up to you, and what it means to thrive is up to you. But I would argue that universally, like your art being this hobby where you don't have enough money to support it, and you not selling your work or not having an audience around your art is not thriving. Okay. And so I'm not here to pressure everybody that they need to make $1 million off of their art. At the same time, I wrote this book to challenge the assumption that art has to be obscure for it to be meaningful, or artists have to starve in order for them to, have a better aesthetic. It's just not true. I was just talking to this guy today who's a fine artist in Indianapolis. By the way, artist to me is a broad term. I think we all understand that to be more than painter. And in the book, I highlight creative entrepreneurs, painters, musicians, writers, and lots of people who have a creative gift to share. Anyway, I keep running into these people, and I just talked to this guy who's killing it. Like he's selling a painting a day. He's living in Indianapolis, and he's making a 6-figure income. Like it says, as you mentioned, good kind of upper middle class living, especially for indie. And he's doing it selling oil paintings. And so I keep running into these people, and this has been happening for the past 5-6 years as I've jumped into the world of being a writer. I'm not a fine artist. That's something that I think you and I share, Cory. We love art and creativity, but the audiences that we serve, are broader than the thing that we do. And so I kept running into people, as you have, actors, musicians, writers, people who weren't starving, who were making a great living. And I was like, wait, like something's going on here. It's not impossible for you to make it as an artist today. Yeah. And then I kept running into another group, which were the people who were like, my life sucks, this isn't working, or like they were really talented and something just wasn't working. And this kind of confounded me because growing up, I've always been creative. I used to draw cartoons of Garfield when I was a little kid, and I made comic books when I was a teenager, and then got in a band and wrote songs. And then I was an actor and director in college. And then I got into marketing, kind of in my, real life, career. And so I get to basically 30 and I realize, oh, what I really want to do is be a writer. And it's something I've always been doing, but I don't even know that that's possible, because everybody in one way or another told me artists, writers, creatives starve. And so when I finally did make it as a writer, I was sort of surprised at like how easy it was. I mean, I'm not like, it wasn't that hard. I know exactly, I'm not that smart.
Yeah.
And I'm not that talented. And I think people who succeed want to tell you it's really, really hard. And I got really lucky. So it's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that bad. Like, I worked hard, but it wasn't hard.
Yeah.
It wasn't impossible. Yeah.
So there's, I constantly have these conversations with artists who are like a little embarrassed at how well they're doing.
That's right.
Like one of my good friends here in town, we met like 10 years ago. And when I first found out what he did, he was like, oh, I'm not really an artist. I just I make these things and I sell them. And then like I got to know him better, and it turns out that he's like in private and corporate collections like all over the world. Yeah. And he's been featured in like every magazine under the sun. And he's just like embarrassed at all of the attention, and he'd rather just be in his studio. And
it's funny.
And I've met so many of these artists who are making, what anybody would consider a decent income.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is unfortunate that it's not common discussion. So this is why I'm so happy to read your book, as it were. So let's maybe dive into some of the questions. But before we do that, what was the impetus for you creating the book? So like you have this writing career, and you've been helping people figure out how to blog and do writing careers and stuff. What was the impetus for this book as opposed to The Art of Work or some of the other stuff you've done?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, and it's probably most of you, and that's okay. I hate when people assume that like, people have heard of you. I mean, if you haven't heard of me, you're like most people on earth. So no worries there. I write books. This will be my 5th book. And help other writers with an online business, similar to what Cory does with online courses and seminars and things like that. So yeah, like I said, I kept running into people who were killing it, and then people who weren't. And you mentioned the 12 rules that basically form the majority of the book. I found that most of the things that the people who were successful artists, most of the things that they were doing were things that the starving artists were actively not doing. In fact, they were avoiding these things. Marketing, valuing their work at a price point that the market could handle and could also sustain them. Networking, doing things that look more like business than art. In terms of like the way we tend to divide those things. And vice versa. Like I saw that the things that starving artists were doing were many of the things that thriving artists were not doing. And I love history. I love biography. How did I write this book? Well, I didn't say I'm going to write this book and go do the research. Every time I write a book, I'm always actively reading history, biography, a little bit of like, business nonfiction. I used to read a lot of that. I don't read as much of that anymore, and some fiction. And I was reading I just finished a biography of Michelangelo. Then I stumbled on this story, and then I was reading a book about Vincent van Gogh, and I started reading about musicians, and I was reading a book about Jim Henson, and I was like, wait, like, maybe the things that are allowing creatives to succeed today are, in a way, the things that have always allowed them to succeed. We just adapt them to the technology and opportunities that exist today. And so I had an experience as a writer where I had gone from aspiring writer to somebody who was, doing it as a full-time living, making a great income, making literally 10 times what I made as a marketing director for a nonprofit, which wasn't much, by the way, but 10 times any number is a decent living. And so I was like, and I kept encouraging people, friends of mine, peers, who were artists, musicians. I live in Nashville. where we've got a ton of creatives here. And I just noticed that there was this mindset where they just thought, like, I have to struggle. And as you said, successful people don't always talk about their success because they're almost embarrassed by it. It defies what we think an artist should be. I was just talking to a fine artist in Indianapolis. His name's Justin Vining, making a great living. And I said, how did you figure out how to price your art? He says, well, most artists price their art based on what they feel it's worth. Mm-hmm. He said, I looked at everything I'd ever sold. I did a calculation based on the ideal price per square inch of my paintings. And I said, oh, okay, it's 67 cents per square inch. And that's the ideal price for it. If I do that, I'll have a gallery and I'll always sell out. Mm. And he hosted a gallery earlier this year. He had 120 paintings and he sold 70 of them in the first night. I said, that's like rare, right? I don't really know much about art galleries. He's like, yeah, it's pretty rare. And he did it with math, right? I have another friend who's a musician here in Nashville. He personal net income makes $1 million a year. Mm. He's not on the radio. He's not playing big shows. He's just kind of figured out the business of his art, and he's doing great. He doesn't talk about this. So like people that are successful don't really talk about how they succeeded because there's this idea of the starving artist, which is like, this is what it takes to be a real artist. And people who are really struggling are believing these things that are they think are going to help their art be better, and it's actually hurting their careers. And so I wrote the book, and the reason I call it Real Artists Don't Starve is not because I'm trying to shame anybody, but because I'm saying, if you're a real artist and you think you have real art to share with the world, then stop starving, because it's a choice, not a necessary condition of doing creative work.
Yeah. And also I 100% endorse everything you just said. And I want to also emphasize that there are things that you can do, right? Like there's all the 10 rules and the marketing stuff that you do and all that good stuff, things you can do that will put you in a position to succeed. Do some people have luck? Yeah. Do some people come from families with money? Yeah. Like, yeah. Are there people who are born with distinct disadvantages because of race or gender or whatever? Yeah, like absolutely. Those are all real obstacles. And I don't want to discount that stuff in any way. I think what Jeff and I are talking about here today is just the steps that most people take, whether they have advantages or not, and that are going to put you in the right position when an opportunity comes along.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I asked people, and so what I did, how I wrote the book was, I took a bunch of stories of famous people that we all know, you know, like a Van Gogh. I saw somebody mention, you know, Van Gogh had his brother supporting him, which I love that you mentioned that, Diane. A lot of people say, well, Vincent Van Gogh starved. Not really. Like he wasn't Michelangelo, but his brother bankrolled him his whole life. And he actually did sell some paintings. People say, oh, he never sold a painting. Actually did. And you could argue that he sold all of his paintings to his brother. And what's interesting about their story is Vincent Van Gogh died, and then a few months later, his brother Theo died. I didn't know this. Yeah. And then Theo's wife, Johanna, sold all, you know, she was the art dealer. She was the person who leveraged all these connections. She had a house full of thousands of paintings. She's like, I got to get rid of these. So yeah, it is interesting. Every story is unique, but basically what I did was I looked at all of these success stories from history. And then I looked at contemporary stories of people, like you said, just average Joes or whatever, Joes and Janes, who were making a living off of their creative work. And I said, it seems to me that my experience, the experience of other people out there, there are some similarities that we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, awesome. So let's maybe ask a couple of questions. So Jamie Wolverton Stone says, is selling prints of your work selling out? So talk to me about selling out.
Yeah. I think that's a subjective thing, right? Like I have found, I don't know if you've experienced this, Cory, I have found that once you reach a certain level of popularity, there's always going to be somebody who calls you a sellout.
Yeah.
I was just doing an interview where somebody said, is writing a marketing proposal art? Now, to be clear, I don't think everything automatically is art, but I think a lot of the things that we do can be art. And I think as soon as we start saying, well, that's art, but that's not art, I mean, then we're in a dangerous place, right? Because now we're sort of censoring things. I do think that art needs to be art to me is when you share your creative gift with the world. And that can be very commercial or not commercial at all, but you need to share your gift and it needs to make some kind of impact. So I know this is a little bit maybe harsh, but if you've got a novel in your drawer that nobody has ever read, it's not art yet because you haven't shared it with somebody.
Mm.
And if you have a painting, a half finished canvas somewhere, that to me, that's not art. Because again, the point of art is it's a gift. I love Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift. And art is meant to impact somebody in some way. Now, every time we say, well, this isn't art, right? Like this thing this way isn't art, we can find some sort of example. But on the commercial side, selling prints art, yeah, I think so. I think it can be. If you're sharing your creative gift with the world, it's definitely not selling out unless you are really compromising some sort of internal value and you feel like you're selling out.
Yeah.
I think we forget how a lot of artists started, which is like very often it's driven by some sort of commercial thing, especially in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite artists is Jim Henson, whom I would argue by any measure, by any metric, is a true, real artist.
I would agree with you.
He had high values, like Sesame Street, no commercials. He's like, we are not selling stuff on this. This is for kids. We are not going to manipulate kids into buying things. So that's why they'd say this episode is brought to you by the letter A. I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting. Now, how Henson got his start was with 10-second commercials with puppets selling coffee. You can look it up on YouTube, Wilkins Coffee, and it's like one puppet, Wilkins, shooting Wontkins in the face with a cannon, saying, oh, you don't like coffee? I mean, that's the commercial. So I think this idea that art and commerce, like that they're separate things, and that art exists outside of commerce, this just isn't true. I think art and commerce are always in this constant struggle, and the artist lives in this struggle. How do I make my art? How do I make a living? And I think idealistically, we often assume if I could just remove that constraint, then I could make my best art. It's not true. First of all, it's impossible. Second of all, it's not true. Like the best art comes out of those constraints. And, Michelangelo's painting the Sistine Chapel because a pope paid him money to do it. And within that constraint, he's trying to find ways to do his best work, meet the demand and expectations of his patron, and say patrons are more often the people around us, people buying our art. So whether that's you're getting commissioned to do something, you're selling something at a gallery, or you're selling something, a product online like a print.
Yeah.
Like we're always wrestling with that. And I want to argue that's not a bad tension as long as we embrace that. We don't slide too far in either direction. To me, selling out is you go totally commercial, and all that means is you start thinking first, how do I make more money versus how do I make the best thing and still kind of live in that constraint. And I would argue that even Michelangelo did that, the wealthiest artist of the Renaissance. So that doesn't mean that you can't make a really good living in that tension. Mm-hmm. But I do think, the best artists wrestle with it. And I love that Walt Disney quote. When somebody accused him of selling out, they said, oh, you're just making movies to make money. He said, no. We don't make movies to make money. We make money so that we can make more movies.
I like that reframe. I like that a lot. Yeah. If you don't have the resources to make your art, how are you going to make it, right? Like you need to figure out a way to do that. So Angela, I think this is Angela, says a lot of artists have a niche of some kind, whether it's one thing they make like dolls or one subject, where so they have one style or landscape. So if I make art in multiple different media, like I carve stone and I paint in several different styles, what's the best way to market myself if you work in different styles?
That's a good question. You might be able to answer that question better than I can. Mm-hmm. I think it's a hard truth is some of the things that you create, will not have the same kind of cachet that other things you create will, with an audience, I mean, with a market. And we have to dance with the market as artists. And so one of the stories I tell in the book, and you were talking about people, various privileges and disadvantages. And there's this great story of this group of men and one woman called the Florida Highwaymen. They were painters. Have you heard of these guys?
No.
Super interesting. There's I talk about them in the book, and there's also there's an NPR story on it. If you Google Florida Highwaymen, super interesting. And it was a group of over a dozen African American men, black men living in the South, living in South Florida in the 1950s and 60s. So these are black men who are artists, and how it happens is this young black man named Alfred Hare studies art under this white man, this fine artist who paints Florida landscape paintings. And Alfred Hare sees that this man is selling his paintings for about $250 a pop. And he goes, cha-ching, he's poor. And he thinks he can paint not as well as this guy named Bacchus, but he thinks he can paint pretty well because he learned from him. And so he just kind of does the math. He goes, well, I probably can't sell a painting for $250, but I bet in the time that it takes him to paint one, I can paint 10. And I'll just paint faster, and I'll sell 10 for $25 a piece, and I'll make the same amount of money. Again, this is in like 1960. And it works. And he has this vision of becoming a millionaire by the time he turns 30. And by the time he was 30, he was driving a Cadillac, living high. And what ended up happening was he connected with a bunch of other African-American painters in Florida at the time. And they kind of created this collective, and they would get together every night and they would paint. And they were called highwaymen because they would take their paintings the next morning and they'd walk up and down the streets and they'd sell their paintings to people. And sometimes they were painting on like pieces of drywall. They weren't buying canvases. They were too poor.
Right.
And they were selling these door to door, business to business. And today there is estimated, they don't know exactly, it's not high art. It's pretty. I mean, if you look at it, it's really beautiful sunsets, but you might argue that it's a little kitschy. And most of them are in motels throughout South Florida. But those paintings now live in the homes of people like Steven Spielberg and other, people in Hollywood. And it's estimated that they painted over 250,000 paintings. So all that to say, if you're a mixed media artist, what do? I don't know. But I think what Alfred Hare did was smart. And what he did was he kept throwing stuff against the wall until he found a market for his art. And what he needed was the right medium, which for him was doing these landscape paintings on whatever they could find, whatever material they could find, and then selling it typically to business owners, and then doing it through a collective. Like they had a group of people that were all kind of coming together as a network and helping each other out. And they would compete. They would try to see who could make the most money in a day. It's a fascinating story because they cared about art, but they weren't trying to create a movement. They weren't interested in fine art. They were trying to make a living. Now, here's what's interesting, Cory. Many art historians have since called the Florida Highwaymen the last great American art movement of the 20th century.
Oh, interesting.
And so when I say like art in commerce, they dance, there's tension. Here's some guys, here's some African-American people who didn't have any advantages at the time, living in a very racist area of the country at a very racist time. And yet they go, we can figure this out. We just need the right kind of product to sell,
right,
the right distribution network, and the right kind of market. And now we're looking backwards going, well, that was a great art movement. It's fascinating. So what do you do with mixed media? I mean, I think you try different things and you'll find different markets for different kinds of work. Like a certain kind of painting or whatever might sell well on Etsy. Something else may do well on Instagram. Something else may only sell very well in like a gallery. It depends on the market. It depends on the work. I think the challenge there is to not get married to any sort of form of art or like group that you're trying to sell to. This guy that I was talking to today, Justin Vining, realized that there was a huge opportunity. He lives in Indianapolis, and he went from painting what he calls like Tim Burton-ish surrealistic paintings, you know, very like contorted, distorted kind of paintings, to you know, more like almost impressionistic oil painting of landscapes. And he realized that there was a huge opportunity to just paint. Most of his clients were local, and he started painting just local landscape painting. And he's one of the big up and comers in Indianapolis. Why? Not a huge art scene, tons of opportunity, not a lot of competition. And, you know, he did that little math equation I mentioned earlier, where he's like, I'll just price it here, and he sells out instantly. Now he has, you know, some different, he's experimented with some different things, but he found something that worked. And I totally think it's fine to try, you know, different things. But if you're an artist who wants to support yourself, you need to be looking for things that work. And if it works, chase it for a while, double down on it, and see where it takes you.
Nice. I love it. Let's see. Next question. Ken Dyler says, I got some advice saying that I should ignore social media and concentrate on building my email list through face-to-face contacts at shows and fairs. My question for Jeff would be this: do offline efforts feed online efforts?
I like that question. I mean, that's two questions. And I'm surprised, and I think you could speak to this better than I could, Cory, at how many artists, particularly painters, people, you know, in more of the fine art world, are doing great with like Instagram. Like this guy that I talked to today, he said he'll post something on Instagram, say, hey, I just painted this, and he'll get a private message saying, can I buy it? He's not even trying to sell it.
Yep.
And it's fascinating. So I do think the marketing media, that, you know, the various mediums that you use, depends on whatever you're selling and to whom, and you just have to experiment with that. So I can't speak directly to that. I do think, you know, as an online marketer, I think it's very important to have an email list to at least supplement what you're doing on social media for lots of reasons. One of which is you own your email list. You don't own your Facebook friends. Mm-hmm. And at any time, and this has happened many times, they can change an algorithm, they can tweak this or that, and it's harder to reach the people that you're trying to reach. So having an email list, I think, is good, whether or not you meet those people online or offline. I think that's a good question. When I was starting out as a writer, I observed that the people that I was following, I live in Nashville, there's a little, you know, creative scene here. We're like an up and coming Portland, I think. You know, getting good food, good coffee.
I've been to Nashville. The food is awesome. And they're like, the creative scene there is so fantastic. I can't wait to go back, actually.
It's speaking of which, you read that Andrew Jackson biography. Have you been to his house, the Hermitage?
No, it's on my list to go.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, my wife and I want to go visit like the 3 different presidential estates in Tennessee. So that's on the list.
Yeah, it's neat. But anyway, you know, so, and I've been here 10 years, so I've seen that transformation happen to what was kind of just an average city in the South to becoming more of a metropolitan area, big entrepreneurship and creative community that goes far beyond like country music, which is, you know, what it's known for. And so I'm watching this happen, right? I'm watching my friends or, you know, people in my community become full-time entrepreneurs or authors. And I'm watching this happen on my couch, frustrated that it's not happening to me.
Yeah.
Have you ever been like on the fringes of a scene and you're watching this happen, you're going, but I'm good. Like, why not me? And I'm watching this happen going, what are they doing that I'm not doing? Mm-hmm. Like, I got a blog. I'm on Twitter. Like, what are they doing?
Yep.
And I realized the one thing that they were doing is they were meeting people, lots of their peers, in person, mm-hmm. at events, over coffee, whatever. And there's a rule in the book, Real Artists Don't Starve, called the rule of the scene. And it's this idea that not all places are created equal, but every place has some sort of creative scene. And it's up to you to join that scene. So when Ernest Hemingway decides at like 21 years old that he wants to become a full-time writer, what does he do? Well, first of all, he goes to Chicago. He takes a job as a journalist, like many aspiring writers do. He goes to this author named Sherwood Anderson, tells him to move to Paris because that is where the most interesting people in the world live, is what he says. He goes, okay, I'll move to Paris. Moves to Paris. And who lives in Paris at the time? None other than everybody.
Yeah.
Gertrude Stein, James Joyce, Pablo Picasso, they all live in Paris. And so he joins that scene. And to join a scene doesn't just mean you live in the city, right? You could move to New York City and not be a part of the fashion scene.
Right.
To join a scene means you show up, first of all, you become friends with other people in that scene, and then find some way to participate in what's going on there, often through helping people, networking, connecting people with each other. And this is what Hemingway does. He's the young kid. And so what does he do? Well, he shows up as the student, right? So he goes over to Gertrude Stein's house every day in the afternoon and listens to her, talk about what everybody's working on. And she gives advice. Don't buy clothes, buy paintings. And our house is full of all these Picassos that would eventually be worth millions of dollars.
The story, and he goes the pictures of Stein's studio, Stein's off, like her home
salon.
There's pictures stacked on pictures, and then you realize that it's all like these super famous artists. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, Picasso, Matisse. There's a story about her, like 100 days in a row, sitting for Picasso and letting him paint her again and again and again. He has reportedly painted her over 100 times.
Right.
She was his patron.
Yeah.
And she was patron of him, Matisse, and several other people, especially when they were getting started. And so, Hemingway joins the scene. He gives boxing lessons to Ezra Pound, and in exchange, Ezra Pound teaches him how to write terse prose, punchy prose, which is the thing that he becomes known for. He networks with F. Scott Fitzgerald, who introduces him to his publisher, Scribner's, and all these things happen as a result of Hemingway becoming a part of the scene.
Right.
And so I'm here in Nashville going, well, what's the scene here? Oh, everybody's hanging out at this coffee shop. I guess I'll go hang out at that coffee shop and maybe bump into somebody. Or everybody's going to this conference. I'll go there. And you just start showing up and connecting with people. So I do believe that offline relationship feeds online connection, because it's one thing for me to know Cory's avatar on Twitter or Facebook. It's another thing for us to hang out and have a drink at a conference in Portland, and then to reconnect on social media 6 months after that. There's just a deeper level of connection because you've had a real experience with them. So I want to be clear here, though. Like, I'm not saying you got to move to Paris or New York or Portland or whatever. I am saying find your scene, find out where your people are, and go be a part of that. Show up, participate in what's going on, and try to help. What I love about Hemingway, because he's kind of a brash, macho guy, and throughout his career is not known as like a nice guy.
Right.
And ends up burning bridges with these people later. But what I think is fascinating is he goes there serving these people. He helps Gertrude Stein get published.
Yeah.
He edits this literary magazine for free. He does all these favors for people, and it ends up paying off. And this is an important part of being a part of any scene, big or small. We do not succeed in our creative work by ourselves. And sometimes it means we've got to move around, even if that means for a lot of us moving across the room and going and being a part of that group of people talking over there. I know some of you are introverts. I get it. I know what it's like to be shy. Find a way to connect with your people, because the best art is not made in solitude. It's created in community.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really useful, practical advice. So I know we've got about 15 minutes left before you got to run to your next interview. You're on a press sprint today. But so the book, Real Artists Don't Starve, in the book you have these 10 tips, 12, I keep saying 10, these 12 tips that are things that thriving artists do to succeed. You just talked a lot about one of them, about being part of the scene, right? So the book comes out when?
June 6th.
June 6th. And it's available for pre-order now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can get that anywhere that books are sold.
Yeah, if you go to don'tstarve.com, which is the fun domain that I bought, don'tstarve.com, you can learn more about it. We've got basically a free online course, which is just a video complement to the book, How to Make a Living Off of Your Creative Work. Again, this applies to lots of different disciplines. In the book, I talk about musicians, fine artists, photographers, creative entrepreneurs, how to follow these rules and apply them to your own creative work. Plus an online community and some other fun bonuses as well.
Nice. So Susan Richardson says, "This is great. I'm buying the book now." There you go.
Oh, thanks.
You got at least one sale.
Awesome.
So Linda Urson says, question for Jeff. If you had to pick one single online strategy to promote your art, what would it be?
I'm thinking about this. So I believe that all art needs an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the best thing that you could probably do is just share your work, share your process. I was just talking to Lisa Congdon. Do you know her?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. She's kind of a kindred spirit, and she was sharing with me how she kind of came along in her, career. And it began with her just sharing her process on Flickr.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned Justin Vining, who sells paintings just by posting them on Instagram. I am a big fan that you want to charge what you're worth and value your work, but you don't want to overvalue it. And I think the biggest challenge for creatives today is anonymity, right? I always tell writers the worst thing is not that people are going to steal your work. Writers are especially worried about this because words are easy to steal.
I bet painters are just as worried about it as writers.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're so worried about somebody stealing your intellectual property, which I get. But I tell people all the time, look, like people can't steal that which they're not aware of, And that is the biggest challenge facing all of us creatives is anonymity. And so the best thing that you can do is share your work. And I'm not talking about working hundreds of hours and giving all that work away for free. I am talking about if you spent, 20 hours painting something, take a picture of it and put it on the internet, and actively, regularly share what you're doing. Austin Kleon says, show your work. And it is the artist's way to market. I mentioned Picasso earlier. He was kind of a natural marketer. And what he did early on when he moved to Paris, he was broke, moved to Paris, and he was in this starving artist community called MoMA. In MoMA. Yeah, he was in Paris. and he very quickly caught on that Gertrude Stein was the person to know that would connect you with everybody else. And so what he did was he left his neighborhood, he went to the Latin Quarter, and he painted Gertrude Stein over 100 times because he knew that her salon was the place where people were gathering. And she started vouching for him, and she started referring other patrons to him. And this is how he started getting paid. Why?
Right.
Because he put his work in front of the right person that shared it. So I think one online strategy, I would try to share like one thing every day on Instagram or Facebook, some sort of visual platform where people are becoming aware of the fact that you're an artist and that you're making stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Cool. So yeah, thank you again so much for all of this great stuff. So when the book comes out, you're going to be, are you going to be out on tour anywhere or going out to see people anywhere?
Yeah, I'll be traveling around a bit. I'll be out in Portland for World Domination Summit in July. So hopefully I'll see you there.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be here.
Come knock on your door.
Yep. Cool. Maybe we'll have to put something together for some artists. Do like a little artist meetup or something during WDS.
That'd be cool. I'd love to do that.
Yeah. All right.
It'd be super fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll be around. I haven't finalized my travel schedule, and I'll be around the internet a lot too.
Right. Yeah. So if people, so get the book at don'tstarve.com, right?
Yep.
And there are people who are posting some questions and likes. Thanks for all the questions and likes and shares, everybody.
Yeah, guys.
Really appreciate that. We've got just about 5 minutes left before Jeff has to bounce. If you do have, I'm looking at my other screen to see the people's comments.
You've got multiple question screens.
So if people have questions, feel free to post those. We got about 5 minutes left. Happy to address any of those. So in addition to the book, which you can find out about at don'tstarve.com, are there additional, like where else would somebody find out about your work? I know you have a blog. Where are the other places people can follow you?
Yeah, my blog is goinswriter.com. I write a lot about writing and my own writing journey, just sharing things that I've learned as a writer. And I kind of live in this world of writing and marketing. I was a marketing director for a nonprofit for about 7 years and have always wanted to be a writer. Now I'm a writer. And so I talk about kind of the intersection of that and teach writers and creatives how to, market their work and all that's on my blog at goinswriter.com.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. And it's great stuff. Like I read the blog and enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks.
Where'd the comments go? Here we go. Rachel Valeri says, I wonder what would happen if we navigated to starve.com.
Oh, boy.
I don't know why that's so funny, but I think it's hilarious. All right. Annie Wilby says, we'll check out the book. Thanks. Yeah.
Cool.
Life in a Scribble says, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with all of us. Like whoever, I don't see a real name there under life with a scribble, but yeah, awesome. And then doing this broadcasting my Facebook Live while also trying to have my Facebook Live up to view comments makes things it's a little slow.
I saw a question from Claire. Does the book ship to the UK? Yes, Claire. You'll want to order it at the Amazon. I think it's Amazon.co. Yeah. Order it at the your version of Amazon, and it may be typically books come out in the UK about a month after they do in the US. So I don't know when the pub date for that is in the UK, but if you pre-order it now, you will get a free online course, free online community just of people that are reading the book, and you can connect with me through there as well. I'm in there about once a day. And I did all these interviews with thriving artists, and all those transcripts are available for download as a pre-order bonus as well. Because I have to wait a whole month. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure when it comes out. I just was trying to temper your expectations. So I don't know when the update for that is in the UK, but if you pre-order it now, you will get a free online course, free online community just of people that are reading the book, and you can there as well. I'm in there about once a day. And I did all these interviews with thriving artists, and all those transcripts are available. Is that you with the playback?
Oh, is that coming through? Huh. All right. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Oh, no. What's going on? My Facebook Live is freaking out.
Or something.
So somebody asked, what's the name of the book? It's Real Artists Don't Starve. And I'm just going to close these windows here. There we go. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that, everybody.
I did that the other day.
Yeah.
We're living in Inception.
Claire says, I have to wait a whole month. Oh no. Anyway, the book is Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. This guy right over here. So again, thank you everybody. Jeff, we're going to let you go so you can head off to your next appointment. But again, thank you for stopping by, and we'll have a replay for this video that'll post to the Facebook page here shortly. So thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, Cory. Thanks, everybody. Hey, somebody was asking about the 12 rules.
Mm-hmm.
I will just post that. There's just kind of these 12 little statements. I'll post that in the chat of the Facebook
Sounds good.
post. Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.